He packed her bags himself, folded her clothes with his own hands, carried her suitcases to the door, and told her to be gone by Sunday, because he had plans, and she wasn't in them anymore. He called her dead weight. Said she'd never amount to anything. Said he was tired of watching a woman with no ambition, no drive, no future, dragging him down while he was trying to rise. He said it in front of his family. In front of their 4-year-old daughter. In front of a table full of people who laughed. And she left. She picked up her child, walked out the front door, and disappeared into the kind of silence that only comes when a person has run out of tears. But here's what Marcus Aldridge didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman he'd just thrown out of his house had, 3 days earlier, received a phone call. A phone call from a lawyer in New York. A lawyer who said 6 words that would change everything. Your great-aunt Eleanor has passed away. And what that meant, what Marcus would eventually have to reckon with, was that his wife, Diane, the woman he'd spent 4 years treating like a burden, the woman he called nothing, had just become the sole heir to the Whitmore estate. $7 billion. Real estate. Hotels. Private equity. A financial empire stretching across 19 states. And she hadn't told him yet. Not because she was hiding it. But because she was still trying to understand it herself. Now pause. Really pause on that. The man who threw his wife out didn't know she was about to become one of the wealthiest women in the country. He didn't know that every insult he delivered over 4 years was being catalogued, quietly, by a woman who had always known her worth, even when he made her doubt it. And he didn't know that the moment he put her bags on that porch, was the moment he sealed his own fate. But this story isn't just about money. It's about what happens when someone who has been underestimated their entire life suddenly has the power to rewrite everything. What do you do with that kind of power? Do you walk away quietly? Do you burn it all down? Or do you do something far more difficult, something that requires more courage than revenge ever could? Diane didn't answer that question right away. Because first, she had to survive. She had to pack a bag with one hand and hold her daughter's hand with the other. She had to drive away from the house she'd helped pay for, past the neighborhood she'd helped choose, and find somewhere to sleep with $43 in her wallet and a 4-year-old asking questions she couldn't answer. She had to do all of that before she could even begin to understand what she'd just inherited. And what she inherited wasn't just money. It was a choice. What kind of woman are you going to become? That's the real question at the heart of this story. And what happened next, no one was prepared for. Before we continue, to our new viewers joining today, subscribe and say hello in the comments. I enjoy recognizing and welcoming members of our growing family. Today's warm shout-out goes to Jocelyn from the United States, Wanda from Georgia, and Juliet from Jamaica. Thank you for being part of our family. Subscribe now and comment below so I can welcome you too. Let me tell you who Diane Whitmore was before she became Diane Aldridge. Because that matters. That matters more than you know. She grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, in a house with 1 bathroom and 5 people. Her mother, Gloria, worked the early shift at a textile mill for 22 years. Her father, Raymond, drove a school bus and fixed cars on weekends. They weren't poor in the way that makes people give up. They were poor in the way that makes people careful. Diane was the kind of child who paid attention. Not the loudest in the room. Not the one who raised her hand first. But the one who remembered everything. The one who noticed when something didn't add up. The one her teachers called Old Soul because she had the patience of someone who understood that most things worth having take time. She was also the one who had a great-aunt she barely knew. Eleanor Whitmore. Her mother's aunt. Eleanor had left Greensboro when Gloria was still a teenager, left and never really came back. She built her life in New York. Quietly, methodically, the way people build things when they don't need anyone's approval. Diane knew Eleanor only through stories, through 2 brief visits as a child, and through a handwritten birthday card that arrived every year without fail, never late, never early, always with the same closing line. Keep becoming, sweetheart. I'm watching. She never knew what Eleanor had built. Her mother didn't know either. Because Eleanor Whitmore was a private woman. Famously, almost fiercely private. She gave interviews once, in 1987, for a business magazine, and refused every request after that. She ran the Whitmore Group from an office in Midtown Manhattan with a team of 12 people who signed confidentiality agreements and meant it. When Eleanor died at 81, her estate attorney had one name on the primary beneficiary line. Diane Gloria Aldrich, née Whitmore. The question no one could answer was, why Diane? Eleanor had nieces, nephews, cousins. She had colleagues, business partners, people who'd spent decades in her orbit. Why the quiet girl from Greensboro who'd visited twice and exchanged birthday cards? That question would take months to answer. But it's not the first question we need to ask. The first question is simpler and far more devastating. Why didn't Diane tell Marcus? She'd gotten the call on a Thursday. The estate attorney, a man named Gerald Mace, had been calm, methodical, patient, walking her through terms and figures and asset summaries in a voice designed to not cause panic. She'd sat at the kitchen table and listened. She'd written numbers on the back of a grocery receipt because it was the only paper she could find. 7 billion. She'd written it and stared at it and thought, that can't be right. Gerald Mace assured her it was right. He gave her a week to process before their formal meeting in New York. He told her to take her time. He told her to speak to someone she trusted. She looked around the kitchen. The dishes from the night before were still in the sink. Marcus had left them. She'd reminded him twice. He'd told her to stop nagging. She folded the grocery receipt and put it in her purse. She did not tell Marcus. Not yet. Not because she was strategic. Not because she was calculating. But because she knew, in the way you know something before you can say it out loud, that the moment she told him, this thing, this fragile, world-altering thing, would become his. And she needed it to be hers, just for a little while. She just didn't know she'd only have 3 days. Because on Sunday, Marcus sat her down at the dinner table, and with his mother watching from the kitchen doorway and his brother leaning back in his chair like a man who'd already heard the verdict, Marcus Aldrich told his wife of 4 years that he was done. But here's the truth, he didn't end the marriage that day. He just didn't know that she had already decided to begin. To understand what happened at that dinner table, you have to go back. Not far. 4 years is not a long time in the architecture of a life. But 4 years is long enough to build something, or to quietly, methodically, dismantle something. Marcus and Diane met in the fall of 2019 at a conference in Charlotte. He was there representing a mid-size commercial lending firm, sharp in a navy suit, good with small talk, the kind of man who makes a room feel like he belongs in it. She was there as a financial analyst for a nonprofit focused on affordable housing development. She'd prepared a presentation on community investment models that took 6 weeks to build. He asked about the presentation. She assumed he was being polite. He wasn't. Or at least, he wasn't only being polite. Marcus Aldrich, at his best, was genuinely curious. He asked good questions. He listened, not in the performance of listening, but in the actual thing. And in that first conversation, over bad conference coffee and borrowed pens, he made Diane feel something she hadn't expected to feel from a stranger. Seen. They were engaged 11 months later. His mother, Beverly, drove down from Baltimore for the announcement dinner and spent most of it asking pointed questions about Diane's family background, her earning potential, and whether the nonprofit sector was really a sustainable path long-term. Marcus laughed it off. Diane smiled and answered every question. But she noticed. She filed it away in the quiet place where she kept the things that mattered but couldn't be spoken yet. But she didn't know, that moment would come back to haunt her. The first year of marriage was easy the way first years often are, not because there were no problems, but because the goodwill was thick enough to absorb them. They bought a house in a suburb of Greensboro. Nothing grand. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a pecan tree, a neighborhood where people still waved from front porches. Diane loved it immediately. Marcus called it a starter house. He said it like it was a category, not a home. Their daughter Lily was born in the 2nd year. Lily came into the world the way some children do, like she'd been waiting a very long time for the specific coordinates of this family and this moment, and she arrived fully prepared. Dark eyes, serious expression, already watching everything. Diane took 3 months maternity leave and came back to the nonprofit. Marcus started talking about her coming back like it was a mistake. Not loudly. Not in one big argument. But in the accumulation of small comments that are sometimes harder to fight than the big ones. Don't you want to be home with her? Seems like a lot of effort for that salary. My mother managed with 4 kids and she never needed 2 incomes. Diane absorbed each one. She went back to work. But here's what was happening underneath, what no one could see yet. Marcus had been passed over for a promotion at the firm. Quietly, without ceremony. His colleague, a man 5 years his junior, had been elevated over him, and Marcus had said nothing publicly and never stopped processing it privately. His confidence, which had always been part of his appeal, began to curdle. The easy curiosity became something harder. The good questions became interrogations. The listening stopped. He started needing to be the smartest person in every room. And Diane, with her careful mind and her research background and her habit of being right when she spoke, Diane became a problem. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what he started doing with other people's opinions of her. Beverly, Marcus's mother, was a frequent guest. She had opinions about everything. About the house. About Lily's sleep schedule. About the meals Diane prepared. About the career Diane had chosen. She delivered each opinion in the tone of a woman doing someone a favor. And Marcus stopped defending his wife. First just in small ways. A shrug instead of a rebuttal. A change of subject. Then in larger ones. He'd echo Beverly's phrasing at dinner. He'd repeat her criticisms back to Diane like they were his own. He'd look at his wife across the table with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between disappointment and distance, like she'd failed a test he'd never told her she was taking. By year 3, Diane had learned something important about her marriage. She was alone in it. Not the dramatic kind of alone. Not the movie kind. The quieter kind. The kind where you share a bed and a mortgage and dinner and you are fundamentally, structurally, invisible to the person across from you. She thought about leaving. More than once. She had a conversation with her mother that went nowhere because Gloria had stayed in things longer than she should have and called it virtue. She had a conversation with her closest friend, a woman named Patrice who had been divorced twice and said get out, baby with such certainty it made Diane laugh and cry at the same time. She didn't leave. And she didn't know, couldn't know, that the reason she stayed would ultimately change nothing about her future and everything about his. Because the trust had already been written. Eleanor Whitmore had updated her estate documents in January of that year. Gerald Mace would later tell Diane that Eleanor had followed her life from a distance, not intrusively, but with the careful attention of someone who had been watching for a specific quality. Steadiness. That was the word Gerald used. Eleanor wanted to leave her empire to someone who had been tested and not broken. Someone who had known difficulty without becoming defined by it. Someone who had survived the particular erosion of being underestimated, and emerged, still standing, still intact. She'd chosen Diane. She just hadn't told anyone yet. And that February, 2 months before the call came, Marcus had a late night at the firm. He came home at midnight, a little too relaxed, smelling faintly like a restaurant he hadn't mentioned. Diane was awake. She said nothing. She registered everything. By March, she'd started sleeping on her side of the bed with the precision of someone sleeping near a stranger on a bus. And then the call came. Eleanor was gone. And with her, a door opened. A door Diane hadn't known was there. And what she chose to do with that door, that's what this story is really about. The Sunday that broke everything started quietly. Diane had gotten up early, made Lily breakfast, oatmeal with honey and sliced banana, the one she'd eat without negotiation, and sat at the kitchen table going over the notes from her call with Gerald Mace. She had questions. Dozens of them. What did controlling interest mean practically? What were the tax implications? What did she need to do in the next 30 days? She had an appointment in New York on Tuesday. She had not told Marcus. He came downstairs at 9, poured coffee, looked at her papers. What's all that? She said it was work. He nodded and looked at his phone. Lily ran in from the living room with her shoes on the wrong feet and Marcus laughed for the first time in days, and for one moment, one brief, suspended moment, Diane thought, maybe I should tell him today. Maybe she should tell him, and they could face this together, and maybe this unexpected thing could reset something between them, restart something that had been slowly dying. She almost did. And then Beverly called. There it was. The moment. The hinge. Marcus was on the phone for 40 minutes. Diane could hear the shape of the conversation from the kitchen, Beverly's voice on speaker, low and insistent, and Marcus's responses getting shorter and shorter, the way they did when he was being reminded of something he'd already agreed to. He came back to the table and didn't sit. He stood there with his arms crossed and a look on his face that she recognized. The look that preceded a verdict. Beverly thinks we need to have a conversation. That was how he started. Beverly had apparently decided some time ago and was only now delivering the decision, that Diane was not a good fit for the life Marcus was building. Those were the words. Not a good fit. Like a candidate who'd made it to the final round and then been quietly declined. Marcus said, "I've been thinking the same thing." He said it had been building for a long time. He said she was holding him back. He said, and this was the sentence that Diane would replay for months, the one that would surface at 3 a.m. for longer than she liked, he said, "You were never going to be who I needed you to be." Diane sat very still. Was this fate, or had she been chosen for this moment? She thought about the grocery receipt in her purse. She thought about Gerald Mace's calm voice saying $7 billion. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore, who had left Greensboro and never looked back, and who had, from a distance of hundreds of miles and decades of silence, decided that Diane was worth everything. She said, "Are you asking me to leave?" Marcus said, "I'm telling you it's time." He said he wanted her out by Sunday. She said, "What about Lily?" And this is where the story takes the turn that no one saw coming. Because Marcus Aldridge didn't want his daughter. Not right now, he said. Not while he was trying to rebuild. Beverly had a room for Lily. She could go to Baltimore for the summer. He'd figure the rest out later. He said figure the rest out later about his 4-year-old daughter. Diane looked at him for a long time. She didn't cry. She would think about that later, the fact that she didn't cry. Not from hardness. But from something that had shifted. Something that felt, strangely, like clarity. She said, "No. Lily comes with me." He shrugged. He actually shrugged. She went upstairs, packed a bag for herself and a bag for Lily. She packed the grocery receipt from her purse into a small zippered pocket inside her wallet where she kept things she needed to be able to find. She went back downstairs. Lily was in the living room watching cartoons, shoes still on wrong feet. Diane sat down beside her daughter. "We're going on a little trip, baby." "Where?" "Somewhere good." They left with 2 bags, a car seat, $43 in cash, and the knowledge, still mostly unreal, still not quite landed, that Diane Aldridge was about to become one of the most powerful women in the country. And Marcus, standing in the doorway watching her go, felt nothing but relief. But that relief was the most expensive thing he'd ever feel. Now let's talk about the days that followed. Because the week between Diane walking out that door and arriving in New York to meet Gerald Mace was not a triumphant week. It was not the kind of week that makes it into the highlights. It was survival. Diane drove 40 minutes to Patrice's apartment with Lily asleep in the back seat. Patrice opened the door, looked at Diane's face, looked at the bags, and said, "Kitchen, now." She made tea she never drank and sat across from Diane and listened without interrupting. That was the thing about Patrice. She understood when the kindest thing was silence. Diane told her about Marcus. About the conversation. About Beverly. She did not tell her about Gerald Mace. Not yet. She needed to hold that information close one more night. She needed to sleep on it without anyone else's reaction in the room. She needed to be just Diane, just the woman with 2 bags and $43 and a sleeping 4-year-old, for one more night before she became something else entirely. Patrice set up the guest room. Diane lay awake until past 2, listening to Lily breathe in the porta-crib Patrice kept for her own grandkids, staring at the ceiling. She kept thinking, is this real? 7 billion. And then she'd think, my daughter is sleeping 4 feet away and she doesn't know her father sent her off with a shrug. And then she'd feel the thing under the disbelief, the thing that was waiting. Anger. Not the hot kind. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't break anything. The kind that builds something instead. She fell asleep before sunrise. Monday she called her mother. Gloria picked up on the second ring and listened to everything. When Diane was done, Gloria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your great-aunt Eleanor used to say, the ground doesn't care who's standing on it. Only the person standing does." Diane wrote it down. Monday afternoon she called Gerald Mace and confirmed Tuesday. Tuesday she drove to New York. And that's when everything changed. The Whitmore Group occupied the top 3 floors of a building on Lexington Avenue. Diane had expected something grand and found something quietly powerful instead: clean lines, natural light, good art on the walls, the particular silence of a place that doesn't need to perform its importance. Gerald Mace was 70, silver-haired, unhurried. He'd spent 40 years in estate law and had the manner of a man who'd seen every human reaction to unexpected news and had stopped being surprised by any of them. He shook Diane's hand and looked at her carefully. "You look like her," he said. "Like Eleanor?" "Around the eyes. The way you're taking everything in without reacting yet." He showed her the estate documents. The asset summaries. The org chart. 19 companies across 4 verticals: commercial real estate, hospitality, private lending, and infrastructure equity. 712 employees. A board of 7 directors who had been notified of Eleanor's passing and were currently operating under interim protocols. They were waiting for Diane. But here's the truth: Diane had no idea how to run a $7 billion empire. She said that to Gerald. He didn't flinch. Eleanor didn't either, he said. When she started. He explained that Eleanor had spent 2 years preparing for this transition. There were detailed briefings for Diane at every level. Department heads who'd been instructed to treat her arrival as a continuation, not an interruption. A team of advisors, all vetted by Eleanor personally, who were available to her at any hour. Eleanor had also left a letter. Gerald slid it across the desk in a cream-colored envelope with Diane's name in Eleanor's handwriting. Diane didn't open it in the office. She put it in her purse, next to the grocery receipt. She spent 4 hours in that building on Tuesday. She met the CFO, a woman named Loretta Vance, who was 55 and had been with Eleanor for 20 years and had the quiet authority of someone who had kept great things running without ever needing credit. She met the general counsel. She met the heads of each division. Every one of them looked at her the same way. Waiting. Hoping. Carefully not projecting. By the time she left at 5, she was vibrating with something she couldn't name. Not excitement, that wasn't the right word. Something more like weight. The weight of being handed something real. She picked up Lily from Patrice's, drove to a hotel, got Lily bathed and fed and into bed. Then she sat in the bathroom with the door closed, turned on the fan for white noise, and opened Eleanor's letter. It was 4 pages. She read it 3 times. And when she got up, she looked different. Not to anyone watching. But to herself, in the mirror. She looked like someone who had just been told the truth about why they were always going to be okay. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in patience. Diane hired a personal attorney, a woman named Carmen Osei, who came recommended by Gerald Mace and who had the particular combination of warmth and precision that Diane instinctively trusted. They filed the estate transfer documents. Diane was formally named controlling principal of the Whitmore Group on April 12. The board convened a meeting. Loretta Vance presented the quarterly report. Diane asked 3 questions that made Loretta pause and then nod slowly in that specific way that means, "This one's going to be fine." The divorce proceedings with Marcus had begun. He'd filed first, which Carmen said was fine. Better, actually. Marcus had retained a lawyer, one of those attorneys who talks fast and bills slow, and that lawyer had begun, in the way these things happen, building a picture of Diane as a woman of modest means and modest prospects. What no one realized, including Marcus's attorney, was that the asset disclosure would be filed in 2 weeks. Carmen had Diane sign off on every document with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this 100 times and knows exactly how the next scene plays out. Diane asked, "When do they find out?" Carmen smiled. Not unkindly. When the law requires it. It started with a mutual friend. Someone who worked in finance. Someone who'd seen the announcement in a business publication, a brief notice, the kind that runs in the back pages, about the Whitmore Group transition of leadership. He called Marcus on a Thursday evening, just to check in, the way people do when they've heard something and want to see if you already know. Marcus didn't know. He Googled. And then he sat in his living room in a house that was suddenly very quiet and stared at a screen for 20 minutes. 7 billion. Diane. His Diane. He called his mother. Beverly's response, and this matters, was not, "Oh my goodness, you should call her." It was, "Well. You need to make sure you're protected." He called his lawyer the next morning. The lawyer had already seen the disclosure. There was a long pause on the phone. The assets were acquired post-separation, the lawyer said. The inheritance was disclosed after the filing date. Under North Carolina law. Marcus interrupted. What does that mean for me? It means, the lawyer said carefully, that what your wife inherited is not a marital asset. Another long pause. But that's, Marcus started. Legal, the lawyer said. I know. It happened on a Saturday. Diane and Lily were in a park near Patrice's apartment, a small park with a good sandbox and a climbing structure shaped like a ship. Lily was digging with methodical intensity, building something that had changed its identity 3 times and was currently either a road or a river. Out of nowhere, in the way children ask the questions adults have been dreading. Mama, why doesn't Daddy want to live with us? Diane kept her face steady. She said, sometimes grown-ups change, baby. It's not because of you. It has nothing to do with you. Is it because of me? No. Are you sure? I am completely sure. Lily looked at her for a long moment with those dark, serious eyes. Then she went back to her digging. Diane sat on the bench and stared at the tree line and thought about Marcus's shrug. And what she felt, in that moment, was not rage. It was resolution. She was going to build something. Not for spite. Not for revenge. But because Lily deserved to grow up watching her mother build something real. And because Eleanor had handed her the tools, and it would be a kind of dishonor not to use them. She thought about the letter. She thought about one specific line. Don't build for them, Diane. Build for the people who come after. That's the only building that lasts. She called Loretta Vance that evening. I want to move faster, she said. Loretta said, we've been waiting for you to say that. The asset disclosure was filed on a Tuesday. Carmen Osei submitted it at 9 in the morning. By noon, Marcus's lawyer had called 3 times. By 2, Marcus himself was in his lawyer's office staring at the document. The Whitmore Group. A full estate inventory. Property in 19 states. Hotel properties. Equity stakes. Commercial portfolios. And at the bottom, a note from Carmen. Ms. Aldridge is prepared to offer a fair settlement in line with applicable law. Her priority is Lily's well-being. She requests primary custody and is willing to discuss reasonable visitation terms. She is not interested in protracted proceedings. Marcus read it twice. He asked his lawyer, what can I get? The lawyer said, honestly. What she's offering is probably more generous than what a judge would give you. Why? Because, the lawyer said, you left. You filed. You told her daughter to pack a bag. He paused. She has good counsel and clean hands. Marcus drove home without speaking. He sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. He thought about Diane at the kitchen table with her papers. He thought about the look on her face when he'd said figure the rest out later about Lily. He'd seen something in her face then that he hadn't recognized. He recognized it now. It wasn't devastation. It was a decision. Here's what everyone expected. When the news broke, and in a small city, news breaks, everyone expected one of 2 stories. They expected either, Diane vanished into wealth and left everyone behind, turned cold, turned untouchable, became the kind of woman who is talked about but never seen. Or they expected, Diane came back for revenge. Used the money the way a weapon gets used. Made lives difficult. Let Marcus feel every dollar of every mistake he'd made. Both of those stories were satisfying. Both made sense. Neither was true. That was the first twist. Diane did not disappear. She did not extract revenge. What Diane Aldrich did with $7 billion was go home. Not to Marcus. Home to Greensboro. She bought a house 4 miles from where she grew up, in a neighborhood that had been struggling for 15 years. She enrolled Lily in the local public school. She showed up at the parent meetings and the school board meetings and the city planning sessions. She told Loretta Vance, I want to build here first. Loretta said, there are better markets. Diane said, I know. But there are people here. Within 8 months, the Whitmore Group had committed to a $40 million community development project in 3 Greensboro neighborhoods, affordable housing, small business lending, workforce training programs. Local contractors. Local hiring wherever possible. The Charlotte Observer ran a profile. It was the first interview Diane had given. The journalist asked about her marriage. About Marcus. Diane said, "I'm not interested in relitigating that. I'm interested in building forward." The journalist asked, "Do you regret anything?" Diane said, "I regret that it took me longer than it should have to trust myself." She said, "But I think that's most women's answer to that question. And I think that's something we should talk about." The interview went national. That was the first twist. She chose to build. But the second twist, the one that redefines everything, that's what was in the letter. Eleanor Whitmore had written Diane's name into her estate not because of who Diane was now, but because of who Eleanor had been. Gerald Mays had known Eleanor for 40 years. He knew the whole story. And on a rainy afternoon in May, 6 weeks after the transfer, he sat across from Diane in his office and told it to her. Eleanor Whitmore had been married once. Briefly. In 1966. His name was Franklin Shaw. He was well-regarded, ambitious, charming, the kind of man who knew how to make a room feel warmer just by entering it. They'd been married 14 months when he sat her down and said he'd been thinking. He said she worked too much. He said she was becoming someone he hadn't agreed to marry. He said she had potential but the wrong application of it. He said she was a good woman who had misunderstood her purpose. He said he needed a different kind of partner. He left. Eleanor was 27, 7 months pregnant, and had $12,000 in a savings account. She lost the baby at 8 months. She buried her child alone. And then she went to work. She worked for 15 years without stopping. She built the first company with a small loan and absolute clarity of purpose. She never remarried. She never gave another interview after the one in 1987 because she'd learned that visibility invites opinions and opinions slow you down. She watched her family from a distance. She watched Gloria. She watched Gloria's children. She watched Diane. And when Diane married Marcus Aldridge and Eleanor watched, from the distance she always watched, she saw something that looked familiar. She saw a woman being slowly, quietly erased. And she saw that woman refuse to disappear. That's why it was Diane. Not because Diane had achieved the most. Not because she had the best credentials. But because Eleanor had seen her walk through the particular fire that Eleanor herself had survived, the fire of being underestimated by someone who should have known better, and she had watched Diane emerge from it still recognizably herself. She didn't choose Diane because of what Diane had. She chose Diane because of who Diane was when she had nothing. Diane sat in Gerald's office and listened to this story. She thought about the birthday cards. "Keep becoming, sweetheart. I'm watching." She hadn't known what it meant. Now she did. Eleanor hadn't been watching her life from a distance. She'd been watching a test. And every year, Diane had passed it without knowing she was taking it. A year after she left that house with 2 bags and $43, Diane sat on the porch of her Greensboro home and watched Lily chase fireflies. It was June. Warm. The sky was that particular purple blue of southern evenings, the kind that makes everything seem briefly possible. The divorce was final. Marcus had accepted the settlement Carmen put forward. Primary custody to Diane. Lily would spend every other weekend with her father, who had moved back in with Beverly and was, by all accounts, working through a lot. Diane didn't think about Marcus much. Not because she'd hardened. But because the space she'd once given him had been filled with something real. She thought about Eleanor instead. About the woman who had built an empire and buried it inside a silence that lasted 50 years. Who had never gotten to watch her own child grow up and had chosen, as an act of love Diane was still learning to understand, to watch someone else's instead. She thought about the cost of Eleanor's life. The loneliness of it. Eleanor had won. By any measure anyone would use, Eleanor had won. But she'd won alone, and she'd known she was winning alone, and somewhere inside all that success she had felt the specific coldness of a life lived without anyone who truly knew her. Diane had no intention of repeating that. She'd started a friendship with Loretta Vance that had surprised them both, regular dinners, honest conversations, the particular ease of 2 women who had decided to stop performing and just be. She'd reconnected with her mother, Gloria, who had moved into the house 2 blocks over and had opinions about everything and was the first person Lily asked for every morning. Patrice came for a month in the summer and never fully left. The work was real and hard and endlessly complicated. There were board meetings where she was underestimated and moments where her instincts conflicted with financial logic and decisions that kept her awake at 3 in the morning. She made mistakes. She learned from them. She hired well and asked questions and remembered what Eleanor had taught her without ever saying it directly. The person in the room who asks the most honest questions is usually the one with the most power. She was building something. Not a monument to what she'd survived. Something living. Something for Lily to grow up inside of. But none of it was perfect. There were nights when she was tired in a specific way that success doesn't cure. There were moments when Lily asked for her father with a longing that Diane couldn't fix. There were days when the weight of the responsibility sat heavy in a way that felt less like power and more like consequence. The cost was real. The loss was real. The growth was real too. She watched Lily catch a firefly in both hands, hold it up to see the light, then let it go. "Mama, why do they glow?" "To find each other," Diane said. "In the dark." Lily thought about that. "I think that's nice," she said. "Me too, baby." And that's when Diane realized, sitting on that porch on that particular June evening, that the truth hadn't just changed her life. It had revealed who she had always been. "I want to ask you something." When Diane walked out of that house with $43 and her daughter's hand in hers, not knowing what she was walking toward, what would you have done? Would you have told Marcus about the inheritance? Would you have told him before he had the chance to leave, hoping that news might change something? Or would you have done what Diane did, held it close, not as a weapon, but as a private truth you needed to understand yourself before you shared it with anyone? There's no wrong answer. But I want you to think about it. Because that question is really asking, what do you believe you deserve, before the world confirms it? Diane knew she deserved more before she had a single dollar to prove it. She knew it sitting at that kitchen table with her papers. She knew it watching Lily eat oatmeal with banana. She knew it in a specific way people know things they haven't yet spoken aloud. Now here's the question I really want to debate. Did Marcus deserve any forgiveness? Because here's the thing, Marcus wasn't a monster. He was something more ordinary and in some ways more dangerous. He was a man whose ego outgrew his character. A man who mistook a good woman's patience for weakness and her steadiness for limitation. Does that deserve forgiveness? Some of you are saying yes. People grow. People change when loss makes the lesson unavoidable. Some of you are saying, forgiveness is for Diane's peace, not his benefit. And those aren't the same thing. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to read every single one. And I want to know, which moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it Lily asking, "Is it because of me?" Was it Eleanor watching from a distance for decades, choosing Diane based on who she was when she had nothing? Was it Marcus shrugging about his own daughter? Was it Diane reading that letter on a bathroom floor? Tell me. I mean it. Because these stories don't just live in the telling. They live in what you carry out of them. They live in the question you sit with after. They live in the conversation you have with yourself, late at night, about who you've been to the people in your life, and who you want to become. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you thought this story was intense, wait until you hear what happened next. The next story is about a man who spent 20 years building a company for his family, only to discover, in a single afternoon, that his family had been quietly building a plan to remove him from it. And the one person he never expected to stand with him was the one person he'd spent 20 years overlooking. That story is coming very soon. Subscribe for stories that stay with you long after they end. And remember, the ground doesn't care who's standing on it. Only the person standing does. We'll see you in the next one.